The Automobile Association has warned that the price of petrol could increase by over R3 a litre next month. It says the latest data from the Central Energy Fund shows a possible petrol price increase of between R1.93 and R1.97 a litre, while diesel could go up by between R1.60 and R1.62 a litre. Furthermore, the full general fuel levy is expected to be restored at the end of the month. Government cut the levy by R1.50 for 2 months to give consumers some relief. The predicted price hikes and the return of the full levy could result in an increase of around R3.47 in the price of petrol. Right, let's get more on this then. Layton Beard from the AA joins me now. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Before we start with the increases, just explain to us how the petrol price is actually determined and made up.
Good morning, Nzinga. So there's a number of different components that comprise the fuel price. There's, obviously the purchasing prices, but then there's also the wharfage prices, the transportation prices, the storage prices. There's a number of different elements that come into the picture. And as you mentioned in your introduction, in South Africa's case, we have two main taxes that are added to the fuel price: the general fuel levy, which is currently pegged at R3.94 a litre, and the road accident fund levy, which is used to compensate victims of crashes. And both of those levies comprise combined around R6.11 of every litre of fuel. So the relief that was offered by government for April and May was obviously very welcome, because it took R1.50 off those taxes. But that was short-term relief, and although it cushioned the blow for motorists and for consumers generally, it didn't take away the pain, because we still had, unfortunately, increases to the fuel prices in both of those months, including in the month we're in May. That relief comes to an end now at the end of May going into June, and government has indicated that it's not going to continue with that relief. It has other proposals on the table to deal with these rising fuel costs. Now, as you also mentioned, we're seeing some significant fuel prices from the data of the Central Energy Fund are predicted going into June. With the return of that fuel levy, it's going to be quite significant increases at the end of the day.
Layton, can you give us some insight into what that possible different government relief may be, or what it should look like for consumers?
Well, government put on the table a number of proposals to deal with some of the smaller levies. Now, part of the composition of a litre of fuel is smaller levies, and they're not obviously as big as the two main levies, but they said that they would give some relief in terms of decreasing some of those. But there we're talking about 3, 4, 5 cents maximum, so it's not significant or big decreases or relief in that form. Government also spoke about putting a cap on the price of 93 octane fuel in Gauteng. That was one of the proposals that's had on the table. So again, it's a question of wait and see, and we need to know what government's plans are going forward. It's part of the message that the AA has been saying for a long time of we need to review the fuel price, in the sense of we need to know whether all of the components that I spoke about earlier and in more detail are still necessary for the fuel price, and whether those calculations are still correct. So, government has noted 1 or 2 proposals, as I've mentioned, but we maintain that a complete review of the fuel price is still necessary, and we're eager to have something like that get off the ground sooner rather than later.
Going forward, as consumers, should we just accept that there's going to be another petrol price increase after June, in light of the fact that our performance of the rand is quite weak? There's volatility in the markets, there's a war in the Ukraine, there's supply chain issues, and those are just some of the scenarios that we're dealing with currently.
Yeah, it is an unfortunate reality, Nzinga, that fuel costs throughout the world are rising and increasing. And South Africa is not unique in the sense that we've had these fuel increases. If you look at news reports from around the world, the cost of living is increasing at a very rapid rate, and it's on the back of the fact that fuel is becoming more expensive. So you look at countries in Europe and you look at North America, I mean, these countries are experiencing the same types of fuel problems in terms of costing that South Africa is. So we are not isolated in this, and unfortunately the prognosis for June at least isn't very good. Looking further than June is very speculative because, as you mentioned, these things are dependent on things like the Rand-US dollar exchange rate and on international petroleum prices. And we've seen in the past that there's a lot of fluctuation in both of those factors. The 1 month you could have a Rand that is very strong, and that will obviously mitigate against rising costs. On the other hand, you may have international oil prices that may come down for whatever reason. So it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen after, the June increase, which we think is certainly going to happen. It's perhaps just the quantum of that increase that I think is now up for debate. It's a question of, unfortunately, wait and see. But I guess some relief is that it's not a unique South African problem. This is something that is happening around the world, and I know that may be cold comfort to a lot of people, but it's the reality of where we are internationally at the moment.
We're going to be doing an interview later on with a bank which is saying that consumers in the first 5 days spend about 80% of their salary. South African consumers, especially middle-income ones, are extremely constrained. An increase of around R3.47 is going to make a large difference in people's budgets. Do you have any solutions or things that people perhaps may be trying besides starting to walk to work?
Yeah, it's a question we get asked, a lot. And I think in terms of fuel costs, we need to understand that, fuel is an input cost in a lot of industries in South Africa, and that input cost is obviously carried over to consumers. So in the farming sector, in the mining sector, in the manufacturing sector, in the road freight sector, all of these things are going to become more expensive because their input costs are becoming more expensive. In terms of individuals and how they deal with fuel, obviously very important to know your fuel cost on a day-by-day basis. So an analysis is necessary. That's something that you need to do. You need to do your homework on that. And then you need to look for alternative ways in which you can perhaps save fuel and save your costs. This may include, carpooling, if you've discussed with your insurer first, obviously, making use of public transport where it is available, safe and more affordable than using your own vehicle, making sure that your vehicle is in the right good condition, that your tires are inflated properly. So these are the types of pieces of advice we give people. In terms of broader budgets, unfortunately, people are going to be more constrained than they were previously with the money that they're getting in. And it is a huge concern for the AA. And I think one of the things we haven't touched on in Nzinga is the fact that illuminating paraffin is becoming so expensive. And that's really going to hurt a lot of people in our country who rely on that fuel for cooking, heating and lighting, especially as we go into winter. So, it's a question of doing what you can at the moment with the fuel and with the budget that you have. And it may come down to you having to cut things that may not necessarily be necessary, and that's not something that a lot of people can do. But if you have to live with fuel, you have to manage that cost as best as you can. It's not a great situation for anybody to be in.
Layton Beard, AA spokesperson, joining me there. Thanks so much for your time and insight on SABC News this afternoon.